I was only trying to steal a little bit of the world. That was all that scrap of newspaper was to me, a thin, crumpled piece of somewhere else. Somewhere that wasn't Cypress Bend Plantation, Mississippi, 1832. Somewhere that didn't smell like sweat and iron and old blood baked into the dirt. I'd found it snagged on a thorn bush near the road, words half torn, half smeared, but still there, still alive. And I had tucked it inside my shirt like it was a stolen coin. By midday, the sun was high and mean, beating down so hard it felt like it was trying to push us into the ground. We were turned loose for a short break, barely enough time to swallow a ladle of water and chew on cold cornbread. The others sank under the pecan trees or leaned against wagon wheels, letting their backs rest for a breath or two. But I walked toward the barn, careful and slow, like I had some ordinary task in mind. You learn to move your body one way and your mind another, out here. My hands and feet belonged to Master Silas Beaumont, but my thoughts, those were mine. At least, that's what I told myself when the nights got too long. The barn sat a little ways off from the main yard, a long, low shape of rough boards and old nails, smelling of hay, horse, and dust. It was a place of work, mostly. Stalls to muck out, tools to hang, harnesses to oil. But to me, it had become something else too. There were shadowed corners there, beams of light that fell just right. Places where a boy could pretend, for a few stolen minutes, that the world was bigger than cotton rows. I pushed the door open, and it gave that familiar old groan, like it was complaining loud on purpose. For a moment, my heart jumped too noisy, too sharp, but the yard behind me stayed the same. No overseer's shout, no bootsteps coming fast. Just the cicadas and the distant clank of chains and voices carrying thin in the heat. Inside, the light changed. It always did. The harsh white of the field turned to something softer, sliced by wooden slats, broken into golden bars that fell across the packed earth floor. Dust hung in the air, drifting slow like it had all the time in the world. The smell of hay wrapped around me, and my shoulders loosened a little without me telling them to. I meant to go straight to my usual spot, that far stall where the boards gapped wider, letting in enough light to see the shapes of letters but not enough for someone outside to see me. I'd pried up a loose plank in the corner days ago, carved out a hollow just the size of a folded page. That was where the newspaper would sleep when I wasn't brave or foolish enough to read it. I closed the door partway behind me, just enough to cut the glare, not enough to look suspicious. My fingers slipped inside my shirt, touching the damp edge of the paper, and a little thrill ran through me. It was a dangerous kind of joy, sharp and bright. Then someone moved in the shadows. I froze so hard it hurt. There is a kind of stillness you learn on a plantation, a way of stopping everything at once. Breath, thought, even the beat of your heart feels like it pauses. In that instant, every story I'd heard came rushing up, the ones about slaves caught with books, with letters, with words they had no right to. Fingers broken, backs opened, eyes ruined, minds beaten back into the dark on purpose. Elijah? Her voice slid out of the shadows, soft and careful, like she was afraid of spooking a wild animal. And maybe she should have been, because every part of me was ready to bolt, to run for the door, to lie myself bloody if I had to. I knew that voice. Everyone on Cypress Bend did. Mrs. Clara Beaumont. For just a moment, my mind refused to match the name to the place. Mistress of the big house, wife of Master Silas, owner of fine dresses and delicate gloves, and a piano from New Orleans that she sometimes touched like it hurt her. I had seen her on the veranda, pale as porch milk in the mornings, with her hair pinned all neat and her eyes far away. I had seen her at supper, sitting straight and still while Master Silas talked loud and laughed louder, but I had never seen her in the barn, not once. Now, she was there, standing near the back, where the light fell, in a narrow stripe across the straw. I turned slowly, because sudden movements can look like guilt, and guilt draws pain. My hand slipped out of my shirt, empty. That little piece of newspaper burned against my skin like it was hot iron. "Ma'am," I said, my eyes dropping to the floor before I even thought about it. The word came out flat, respectful, the way it was supposed to. My shoulders curled in, my hands hung loose. The shape of obedience. It had kept me alive 16 years. I wasn't about to forget it now. For a moment, she didn't answer. I could feel her looking at me, feel the weight of it, like a hand pressed between my shoulder blades. "I didn't mean to startle you," she said at last. Her voice wasn't like Master Silas's. His came out like a whip crack, even when he was trying to be kind. Hers was tired, mostly. A little frayed around the edges, like a dress that's been washed too many times. But there was something underneath it today. A tightness, a tremor. "No, ma'am," I said. I was just seeing to the tack. It was a poor lie, and we both knew it. There was no tack in my hands, no horse waiting, nothing but straw and dust and my own pounding heart. She stepped a little closer, and the light caught her face. I had never been this close to her without other people around. Not in the kitchen, not in the yard, not anywhere. Her skin looked almost like paper itself, thin and pale, with blue shadows under her eyes. There was a small smear of flour on her sleeve, like she had brushed against something in the kitchen without noticing. "Come here, Elijah," she said. Every instinct in me screamed no. A slave boy alone in a barn with the master's wife, that was the sort of sentence that didn't need finishing. It only ever ended one of two ways, and both were bad. Still, my feet moved. Obedience is a habit that sinks into the bones. I stopped a few paces away, close enough to smell the faint scent of lavender and starch on her dress, far enough that no one could say I reached for her. "I know what you do in here," she whispered. Those words slid under my skin like a knife. My mouth went dry. I thought of the paper against my chest, of letters scratched in the dirt by moonlight, of words whispered in my head when no one was watching. It felt like every secret I had ever had was suddenly visible, written on my face in letters 10 feet tall. I started, but the lie broke apart halfway through. Her gaze flicked to my shirt, to the place just over my heart where the edge of the newspaper pressed. She wasn't blind. They liked to pretend we were, but she wasn't. "You don't have to pretend," she said softly. "Not with me. I've seen you watching the newspapers when Silas leaves them on the porch. I've seen your lips move when you think no one is looking. I've seen your eyes. For a second, I forgot to breathe. No one was supposed to see that. I had built my whole life around making sure no one did. You can bend your back. You can drop your gaze. You can let the 'yes, sir' and 'no, ma'am' fall out of your mouth like stones, but your eyes, those tell on you if you're not careful." I had trained mine to be dull, empty, the way they wanted. And still, she had seen. My voice came out hoarse. "I don't mean anything by it, ma'am." Her hands were twisting in the fabric of her apron now, long fingers pulling and releasing, like she was trying to wring water from it. That was when I realized something that almost knocked me sideways. She was nervous. Mistress of the plantation. White woman. Wife of the man who owned my body the way he owned his boots. And she was standing there in the barn, hands shaking just a little, talking to me like she was the one in danger. Maybe she was. "I didn't come to punish you," she said. The words sounded strange in that place, like they didn't belong. Not here, not between someone like her and someone like me. "Then why you here, ma'am?" The question slipped out before I could swallow it back down. Bold, too bold, dangerous. I braced myself for the slap, for the sharp intake of offended breath, for anything that would tell me I'd stepped over a line I couldn't see. None of that came. Instead, she reached into the deep pocket of her apron and pulled out something wrapped in a square of cloth. For a moment, I thought it might be food, a biscuit, maybe stolen from the table. That would have been miracle enough. She unwrapped it slow, letting the edges fall back. It wasn't food. It was a book. A real book. Not a torn scrap. Not a bit of label off a barrel. Not a smeared word on a wagon side. Leather cover, worn at the corners. The spine cracked from being opened and closed 100 times. Gold letters pressed faded on the front. My throat closed up. "I thought," she said, and her voice shook more now, "you might prefer this to scraps." The barn felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. I could hear my own pulse in my ears, hear the muffled sounds of the yard outside like they were coming from underwater. A book in the hands of a slave was a crime. A book in the hands of a slave boy, offered by the master's wife, alone in a barn that was something worse. Something there probably wasn't even a word for yet. I stared at it, at her, at the space between us where the book hovered like a bridge made out of paper and fire. I knew only one thing for certain in that moment. Whatever happened next, nothing in my life would be the same. I was born on Cypress Bend Plantation, though born is too soft a word for how life begins for folks like us. My first breath was drawn under a roof that leaked in the rain and baked in the heat, surrounded by women who whispered prayers over me that I wouldn't hear again until someone else's body was being lowered into the ground. My earliest memories are not of toys or lullabies, but of Mama's tired hands, of the smell of cotton dust, of men with voices sharp as broken glass calling orders before the sun was even up. By 16, I had learned the most important lesson Cypress Bend had to offer. A smart slave doesn't live long, not if the master finds out. Not if the overseer catches the glint in your eye that says you see more than you ought to. Everything here ran on the belief that we were blind. Dumb tools meant only to work. A mule could think too much, and that was harmless, just an animal being contrary. But a slave with a mind sharp enough to question, to dream, to understand, that was danger. That was rebellion waiting to happen. So I hid mine. I learned to dull my gaze, to let my posture fold in just a little, as if my spine couldn't hold the shape of a real man. I made my voice soft when spoken to, careful never to answer too quickly, never to let on that I understood more than the simple commands they expected. Out in the fields, where rows of cotton stretched farther than the eye could travel, men learned to look small, and I had mastered the art. But hiding doesn't mean forgetting. At night, when my back throbbed from stooping, and my fingers were cracked open from plucking bowls until they bled, I would lie awake on my pallet in the slave quarters and trace shapes on the inside of my leg with my fingertip. Letters, words, names. They didn't belong to this place. These were pieces of a world I had no right to, yet I claimed them in secret anyway. Sometimes I'd gather the children in the quarters, pretending to play, drawing lines in the dirt with a stick, erasing them quick when footsteps approached. They thought it was a game, but it wasn't. It was a prayer. Words were my rebellion. Quiet, invisible, but real. Master Silas Beaumont didn't know that. He thought my stillness meant stupidity, my silence meant fear, and my bowed head meant devotion. That was the way he liked his slaves, beaten into obedience, carved down to half their size by work and hunger, kept ignorant enough that escape was just a story used to scare children. Silas was the kind of man who talked about the Lord with one hand and used the other to do the devil's work. He'd read from his big Bible on Sundays, then break a man's ribs with the butt of his rifle on Monday. Folks said he had a temper that came on fast, like lightning striking a dry tree. No warning, just a crack and fire everywhere. If he'd been born farther north, maybe he would have become a preacher or a politician. But here, on this Mississippi land, he grew into something worse, an overseer with a title, a master who spoke in scripture but ruled with terror. His wife, Clara, lived in a different kind of prison. I didn't understand much about white folks' marriages then, but I understood fear. And I saw it in her the same way I saw it in the horses right before the overseer hit them, shoulders tight, eyes darting, breath caught high in the chest. Sometimes, she came to the veranda with powder caked too thick on her cheek, or with her left wrist wrapped in lace when it hadn't been the day before. Silas didn't beat her the way he beat us. He hurt her in ways that left marks deeper than bruises. Everyone at Cypress Bend learned to read the signs. When the master rode away from the plantation angry, he came back drunk. And when he came back drunk, he took his temper out on whoever was closest. Clara, if she spoke too loudly. The slaves, if she didn't speak at all. In the quarters, we prayed for days when he stayed gone, though such days were few. Still, Clara was not like the other white women who visited Cypress Bend. She didn't call us creatures or things. She didn't speak sharply unless someone was watching. She didn't walk with that stiff, proud tilt of the chin Southern ladies like to adopt when inspecting property, human or otherwise. In fact, most days she didn't walk much at all. She drifted, quiet, floaty, like she was hollow inside and needed the breeze to move her. But even hollow things can watch. And somehow, she had watched me. The plantation itself was a world built on lines. The big house at the top of the hill where the white folks lived in polished rooms with oil lamps, velvet curtains, and carpets soft as moss. The slave quarters down in the low ground, where the roofs sagged, the floors creaked, and the air smelled of sweat, iron pots, and damp earth. The fields in between, a sea of cotton, stretching and stretching until it swallowed the horizon. Roads we weren't allowed to walk, doors we weren't allowed to open, books we weren't allowed to touch. But lines blur when no one's looking. Some of my earliest memories were of Mama whispering stories to me while the cicadas screamed outside. Stories of people who ran north, of letters carried by hands brave enough to be broken for them, of marks carved into trees marking secret trails. Mama's stories felt bigger than the cabin's walls, bigger than the plantation, even bigger than Silas's wrath. But she died when I was 10, worn out from childbirth and work and sorrow, and those stories became mine to guard. By 16, I'd taught myself to read in pieces, a page here, a word there, a sign stolen from the road. Every letter was a risk. Every sound I practiced under my breath was an act of defiance. I didn't know then that someone else at Cypress Bend had her own rebellions. Clara Beaumont used to walk the veranda with a book tucked under her arm, romances, poems, little leather-bound volumes sent from Savannah or Charleston. Sometimes she'd stop and look out across the field as if searching for something she'd lost. And though I tried not to look back, sometimes our eyes met for just a second, enough for her to see that I saw her, enough for me to know that she was watching too. Still, I never imagined she would step foot in the barn. That was the one place on the whole plantation where I felt like myself just a little, just for moments. The barn was where I hid my scraps of the world, where I let myself become the boy Mama said I was before the fields claimed me. The day Clara waited for me there shattered the thin shell I'd built around my life. It made the lines blur in ways I didn't understand, in ways that scared me more than the lash ever had. Because when a slave boy and the master's wife share a secret, that secret becomes a fire. One spark too big, and the whole world burns. If I had any sense at all, I would have refused the book right then and there. I would have dropped to my knees like they expected, begged forgiveness for something I hadn't done, and prayed she'd walk back to that big house and forget she ever saw me. That was the safe path, the path every man I knew had walked all his life. Keep your head down. Keep quiet. Keep breathing. But the truth was, I hadn't lived safe a single day since I learned what letters tasted like on my tongue. Once you've had a sip of water, your throat remembers being dry. Once you've felt a word become a thought inside your own head, freedom stops being an idea and becomes something with teeth. So when Clara Beaumont held that book out to me, her hands trembling, her breath shallow like she was doing something sinful, something dangerous, I reached for it. Not fast, not boldly, just enough to brush the leather with my fingertips, like I was touching something alive. It felt smooth, worn at the edges, warmed by her hands. She let it rest in mine without flinching, though I could see her swallow hard as she did. I didn't open it, didn't dare. I held it like it was a burning coal, something that could scorch us both if I gripped it too tight. It belonged to my mother, she said. Her voice sounded thin, like a string pulled too tight and ready to snap. She read it to me when I was a girl. That startled me more than the book itself. I had never heard Clara speak of her life before Cypress Bend. Most white folks didn't talk to us at all unless they wanted something done. Her mentioning her mother felt personal. Too personal. I didn't know what to say. Words were slippery things, and the wrong one could get a man whipped bloody. "I can't take this, ma'am," I whispered. "You must." Her eyes lifted to mine, blue and fierce in a way I'd never seen. I know what this place does to people with minds like yours. There it was again, that strange tremor in her voice, like she was talking to someone who mattered, someone she needed. The thought itself felt dangerous enough to get me killed. She stepped back, pressing her hands into her apron as if to still their shaking. "I see you trying to hide it," she continued. "I see how you look at the world. It's the look of someone who thinks, who sees, who understands." She drew a tight breath. "And if my husband ever notices that look in you, Elijah, he will crush it." That landed in me like a stone in deep water. I knew Silas Beaumont would crush something like that. I had seen him crush men for far less. But hearing her say it, soft and trembling, made the truth sharper somehow, like she was peeling back the skin of the world and letting me see the bone beneath. "I ain't looking for trouble," I murmured. "No one looks for trouble," she replied. "It finds us all the same." She said it with such quiet certainty that it made my chest tighten. I didn't understand her, not really, but I understood pain when I heard it. Then she did something that nearly stopped my heart altogether. She stepped closer, not too close, but close enough that her lavender scent reached me again. Something soft and wrong in the barn's rough air. "Let me help you," she whispered. Help. That word was heavier than any Bible. Silas swung around. He had used it to justify chains. She used it like a plea. I looked toward the barn door, half expecting it to burst open with Silas raging through it. The light around the edges was too bright, too accusing. Every plank seemed to hold its breath. "How?" I asked before I could stop myself. The question was a choice, a turning point. The kind a man doesn't always know he's making until it's too late. She drew the book back just long enough to rewrap it in the cloth, tucking the corners neatly. Then she placed it in my hands again, firmer this time, as if she'd made a decision she couldn't unmake. "I can teach you," she said, "properly, if you want that." My blood throbbed in my ears. "You mean readin'? All of it? Not just letters?" She nodded. "And writing," she whispered, "and understanding what you read." The enormity of it nearly buckled my knees. Writing was worse than reading, worse in the eyes of the law, worse in the eyes of slave catchers, worse in the eyes of masters who feared a slave who could leave messages behind. Writing meant a mind working. Writing meant danger. "Ma'am, they kill slaves for that," I said, my voice raw. "I know." Her eyes didn't waver. "And they break white women for less." That was the first time she ever hinted at her own chains, not the ones around her wrists, but the invisible ones around her life. The ones Silas tightened every time he saw something in her he didn't like. "I ain't never met a white woman who'd risk a beating for a slave," I whispered. She flinched just barely, but enough for me to see the bruise beneath her powder. Faint but real. "Then you've never met a woman who has nothing left to lose." I didn't breathe for several seconds. We both heard it, then the low hum of voices somewhere outside. Maybe up the lane, maybe in the yard. A wagon wheel creaked. Someone shouted orders. Life kept moving around us. Unaware that in the shadow of the barn, two people who should have never spoken beyond necessity had crossed into dangerous territory. Clara stepped back again, straightening her posture so suddenly it made me swallow hard. "We'll meet tomorrow," she said, barely shaping the words. "At midday. You'll pretend to check the foal. I'll say I'm inspecting the feed." I shook my head. "Ma'am, you can't." "We will," she insisted. Her voice had steel in it now, something I didn't expect from someone so soft-spoken. "You'll read to me from that book, and I'll teach you what the words mean." Against my will, something warm and terrifying flickered in my chest. "It ain't right," I whispered. She looked at me then, not as a mistress looks at a slave, not with pity or superiority. She looked at me like one prisoner looks at another. "No," she said quietly. "It isn't. But neither is anything else on this plantation." Another set of voices drifted from the yard, closer this time. Clara's eyes widened. She moved toward the door, smoothing her apron, composing her face like she was putting back on a mask she wore every day. "And, Elijah," she said without turning back, her hand on the doorframe. "Yes, ma'am? If anyone asks, you never saw me today." My throat tightened. "And you ain't seen me readin' nothin', ma'am," I whispered. She paused just long enough for the air between us to change again. "Of course," she murmured. "I would never betray you." Then she stepped into the sunlight, closing the door behind her with a soft click, and I was left standing in the half-dark barn, a forbidden book in my hands, my pulse hammering, and a truth sinking deep into my bones. I had just stepped into something I could never step out of again. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the book. Not its pages, just the shape of it wrapped in cloth, sitting under the loose plank I'd lifted in the barn floor before slipping out at dusk. It felt like a heartbeat under that wood, like something alive, pulsing quietly in the dark, something meant for me and yet forbidden by every law written and unwritten across the South. I lay on my pallet in the quarters, listening to the snores and wheezes of men whose bodies had long given up on comfort. My stomach cramped from hunger. My back throbbed from bending over cotton all day. But none of that was new. What was new was the way my mind ran wild, fast as a rabbit across open grass, unable to slow down even for a breath. What would tomorrow bring? Would she come? Would someone follow her? Would Silas already know? By the time the roosters crowed, my heart felt sore from beating too hard all night. The day in the fields dragged like a body with broken legs. I kept my head low, hands busy, eyes unfocused, just another shadow among the rows of white cotton. But every sound set me on edge. Every shout from the overseer sounded like it might include my name. Every glance from another slave felt like they somehow sensed the weight of the secret under that barn floor. But no one knew. No one could know. And then, just before the midday bell rang, I saw her. Clara Beaumont stood on the veranda, looking out across the yard with that faraway expression she always wore, like she was seeing something on the horizon no one else could. But today there was something else beneath that soft look, something sharper, a tension in her posture, a stiffness in her shoulders. She was waiting for the bell, too. When it rang, she turned without hesitation and walked not toward the kitchen, not toward the parlor, not toward the laundry where white women sometimes went to play at work they didn't need to do. She walked toward the barn. I wiped my hands on my trousers, pretending to be in no rush at all. But my pulse beat faster with each step, fast enough I could feel it in the sides of my neck. Inside the barn, the shadows seemed deeper than usual. Cooler, too, like the heat outside couldn't quite reach into the corners. I went straight to the back stall and pulled up the loose plank. The book lay exactly where I'd hidden it. It was strange, the weight of it. Lighter than a stone, heavier than a life. I turned it over in my hands, tracing the worn leather spine with my thumb, feeling every crack and groove. For a moment, the rest of the world faded. There was only me, the book, and the thin beam of sunlight falling like a blessing across the cover. Then I heard the door creak. My breath caught. "It's only me," Clara whispered. I turned. She stood just inside the doorway, her dress a pale blue that looked almost silver in the dim light. Her hair was pinned back, but loose pieces had fallen beside her face, catching the sun in warm copper strands. She closed the door softly behind her, leaving a sliver of light at the bottom. No witness, no watcher, just the two of us. "You came," I said before I could stop myself. "And you kept the book," she replied just as quietly. For a moment, neither of us moved. It was like stepping into a room where the world had paused, held in place by a breath that hadn't been released yet. Then she walked closer, her steps careful on the packed dirt floor. I noticed something I hadn't before, the way she pressed a hand against her side as she moved. The way her wince was small but real. A bruise, maybe. Fresh, deeper than the powder could cover. "Are you hurt?" I whispered before I could bite the question back. She froze. Her eyes lifted to mine, startled not that I noticed, but that I asked. "It's nothing," she said. But her voice shook. I didn't push. Not because I didn't want to, but because some lines were deep, and we were already stepping too close to all of them. Instead, she gestured to the book in my hands. "Show me what you know." The words sounded simple. They weren't. I opened the book slowly, careful not to let the spine crack too loudly. The smell of old leather and older paper rose up, faint but rich. Words filled the page, neat ink, tight lines, curves and strokes that once belonged to another world. I pointed to the first one I recognized. Read it under my breath, then read the next, and the next. My voice shook at first, my tongue catching on unfamiliar rhythms. But she didn't correct me harshly. She didn't scold. She didn't laugh. She simply knelt in the straw beside me, her skirts fanned out like a pale cloud around her, and listened to me. A black slave boy in a barn, reading her mother's book. It felt like something impossible was happening in front of both our eyes. "Good," she whispered when I paused. "Very good." No one had ever said that to me before. Not about my mind, not about my hunger for words, not about anything I'd done in secret. "You have a gift," she said softly. I shook my head. "No, ma'am. I just try." "Trying is a gift," she replied. "Most people give up before they even start." There was something in her tone, warmth, sorrow, hope, fear, all mixed together that made my chest ache. "Here," she said, pointing to a line of the poem. "This part uses metaphor. It compares the feeling to something else entirely. Do you see the connection?" I squinted at the words, sounding them out again. I saw it. Not fully, not cleanly, but enough. I nodded. She smiled, small but real. I'd never seen her smile like that. "Exactly," she murmured. And for a moment, the barn felt like a world of its own. No master, no overseer, no chains, just ideas, just words, just two people sharing something forbidden and beautiful. Then thunder rumbled in the distance, a storm gathering. The air shifted cooler, heavier. Clara looked toward the door, her breath quickening. We shouldn't risk staying long, but she didn't get up. She didn't move away from me. Instead, she lowered her voice even more, as if the storm were listening. "Elijah, how long have you been teaching yourself?" My hands tightened on the book. "Since I was, maybe 8, maybe younger." 8? Her breath hitched. "That young?" "Mama helped a little at first," I whispered. "Not much, just a letter here and there. But after she passed, I tried to keep at it." Her eyes softened with an ache I didn't know how to name. "I'm sorry," she murmured. No white person had ever apologized to me before. Not once. Not for anything. The barn felt too small then. Too full. A storm outside, a storm inside. And then, a turning point. The one that changed everything. Clara reached out slowly, carefully, and touched the back of my hand. Just a brush. A whisper of skin. Nothing improper. Nothing sinful. Nothing anyone could point at and call a crime. And yet, it was the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to me. Because in that small touch, I realized something with a clarity that struck like lightning. She didn't just want to teach me. She needed this. Needed me. Needed someone to see her, to understand her, to speak to her like she wasn't trapped in the big house with a man who held her life in his fist. And I needed someone who believed I was more than a shadow. The moment passed. She pulled her hand back. The storm outside cracked louder, but the line had been crossed. Not in action, not in intent, but in truth. She saw me, and I saw her, and neither of us could unsee it now. Trouble on a plantation doesn't always come like thunder. Sometimes it comes like a change in the wind so slight you might miss it, unless you've learned your whole life to feel the smallest shift. The first sign was the silence. Not the good kind, the rare, gentle hush after a long day's work, when the frogs start singing and the sky cools. This was a tight, watchful silence, like the whole place was holding its breath. The field hands spoke quieter. The house servants moved faster. The overseer's eyes seemed sharper, cutting across the yard like knives. And Master Silas's footsteps, they sounded different too. Heavier, sharper, like every step was an answer to some anger only he had heard. It started 3 days after the storm. Clara and I had met twice more in the barn since then, always at midday, always with a careful distance between us, always with the book open between our hands like a small, fragile bridge. We had fallen into a rhythm, me reading, stumbling less now, her explaining the meaning behind the words, sometimes drifting into stories of her girlhood in Savannah, of a father who prized education more than appearances, of a life she'd thought she was walking toward and the one she'd been sold into instead. I never asked too much. Questions were dangerous things. I knew that. But sometimes they slipped out of me anyway, and sometimes she answered like she couldn't help herself, like the words had been trapped in her throat so long they rushed out when they found someone willing to hear. Then, one evening, the rhythm broke. We'd just come in from the fields, skin sticky with sweat, shirts clinging to our backs, the last red of sunset bleeding into the horizon. The bell had rung us in, the overseer's whistle cutting through the air. We'd lined up for rations, thin stew, stale bread, and the kind of silence that comes when men are too tired to waste words. As we waited, I noticed Thomas, one of the older house servants, gray at the temples, quick in the eyes, walking from the big house toward us. He rarely came down to the quarters unless sent. Tonight, his steps were slow and deliberate, like each one carried a weight. He called my name, but not loud. Quiet, careful. Elijah. Every man near me stiffened just a hair, though most pretended not to listen. Nothing good ever came when the big house wanted you after dark. Yes, sir, I answered, keeping my voice level. Master wants you, Thomas said, in the stable. My stomach dropped. The stable. Not the barn, not the tool shed, not the smoked house. The stable, Silas's favorite place after the veranda, where he kept his best horses and his worst moods. Now, I asked, before sense could swallow the word back. Thomas's gaze flicked over my shoulder, toward where the overseer leaned against a post, chewing on a piece of grass, watching everything and nothing at the same time. Now, Thomas said, don't keep him waiting. The men around me shifted, some with pity, some with the blank look people wear when they know better than to show anything at all. My mouth went dry. I handed my bowl back to the woman serving rations without taking my portion. You'll need it later, she murmured, sliding it back into my hands. If there was a later. The walk to the stable felt longer than any I'd taken in my life. I kept my steps measured, my shoulders loose, my face empty. The air was thick with the smell of hay and manure and leather oil. Lanterns hung from wooden beams cast pools of yellow light that seemed too bright and too dim all at once. Silas stood by his bay stallion, one hand on the animal's neck, the other wrapped around a coiled riding crop. He wasn't wearing his coat, only his shirt sleeves, rolled up to his elbows. His forearms were strong and lean, veins raised, skin pale and spotted from the sun. The crop tapped lightly against his palm, a steady, unnerving rhythm. Elijah, he said, without turning. I stopped a few feet behind him. Yes, sir. He waited a beat too long before speaking again. Long enough for the fear to start crawling up my spine. Something curious has been happening on my land, he said at last. You know how I feel about curious things, don't you, boy? Yes, sir, I said, keeping my eyes on the ground, my voice as flat as I could make it. He turned then, slowly, looking me over like I was something he'd found stuck to the bottom of his boot. His gaze moved from my bare feet to my hands to my face, lingering there just a fraction too long. You been working steady? He asked. Not slacking in the fields? Not finding yourself, tempted by laziness? No, sir, I said. Truth. At least in the way he meant it. He smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. There was no such thing on his face. I've had reports, he said, pacing a little. The lantern light swung shadows across his features, making his eyes look like deep pits. Reports of folk wandering where they don't belong. Buildings being used for things they weren't meant for. Barns, for instance. My throat clenched. Barns. Don't know nothing about that, sir, I murmured. He took a few more steps, then stopped close enough for me to smell the whiskey on his breath. It burned like old secrets. You're a quiet one, Elijah, he said. Always have been. Never much trouble. Not like some. He leaned in slightly. But I know men like you. I seen them. Eyes too sharp. Heads too full. And you know what happens to slaves who get ideas, don't you? I swallowed. Yes, sir. They forget their place, he said softly. Forget who they belong to. Forget that God himself gave me authority over them. His voice hardened. And that's when I have to remind them. The riding crop snapped through the air once, sharply, not touching me, but close enough that I flinched. Mrs. Beaumont was seen near the barn yesterday, he said, almost casually. Odd place for a lady, don't you think? Especially a lady who don't know one end of a pitchfork from the other. My pulse thundered in my ears. She said she was checking on feed. I said carefully. His eyes narrowed. And what were you doing, boy? Cleaning stalls, sir. I lied without hesitation, doing as I was told. It wasn't an entirely reckless lie. I cleaned stalls often enough. It could be true. That was the kind of lie you survived on, ones that sat close to a possible truth. He studied my face for a long moment, his gaze crawling over every line like fingers feeling for cracks in a wall. You're not stupid, are you, Elijah? He asked suddenly. The question threw me. Sir? Stupid men I can trust, he said. They do what they're told and nothing more. But a clever slave, that's like a loaded gun. Looks harmless until someone pulls the trigger. He tilted his head. Are you a loaded gun, boy? My whole body wanted to scream, no, but my mouth stayed dry and careful. I just work, sir, I said. Same as always. He stared another second. Then, without warning, his hand shot out and gripped my jaw, thumb and fingers digging hard into the sides of my face. Pain flared bright along my cheekbone. Open your eyes, he hissed. They were already open, but I knew what he meant. I forced myself to look at him. Really look. Straight into the pale, cold blue of his gaze. It felt like staring down the barrel of a rifle. He searched my eyes like he was hunting for something inside. I made my gaze flat, dull, the way I'd practiced since childhood. No sparks, no questions, no light, just empty sky. After a long moment, he shoved my face away, hard enough to make my teeth knock together. Thomas says you've been doing good work with the horses, he said. Just like that, tone shifting. Says you're careful. I like careful. He turned back toward the stallion. I'd hate to have to sell a careful boy. A cold chill slid down my spine. There it was. The threat. Not shouted, not snarled, just dropped into the air like something ordinary. He'd sold men for less than curiosity, boys for less than disobedience, women for less than a single look he didn't like. A sale was a quieter kind of punishment than the whip, but longer. It tore you from everything: family, friends, the only places you'd ever known. And there were plantations worse than Cypress Bend. Many worse. Men whispered about them at night, when they thought no one else could hear. Yes, sir, I said. My voice steady only because fear had frozen it. You keep to your work, he said. Keep away from places you don't belong. And remember, he paused, glancing back over his shoulder, you and yours exist here because I allow it. Don't make me rethink my generosity. Generosity. The word tasted bitter enough to choke me. You're dismissed, he said. I backed away. Slow. Careful. Every part of me burning with the effort of not running. Once I was outside, the cool night air hit my face like water. It didn't help. The sky was dark now, the last streaks of sunset gone, stars just beginning to prick through the velvet above. The big house glowed warm in the distance, all lit up with oil lamps and polished glass, while the slave quarters were dim humps on the earth. I started toward them, legs moving like they didn't belong to me. Elijah, the whisper came from the side of the house. I looked over and saw her. Clara stood half in shadow beside the kitchen wall. The faint light spilling from a nearby window outlined her face. Powder couldn't hide the bruise on her cheek tonight, dark and ugly, blooming like a poisonous flower under her skin. My chest tightened. Ma'am, I said softly, glancing around to make sure no one was close. "Did he question you?" she asked, voice barely more than air. "Yes, ma'am," I answered. "'Bout the barn." Fear flashed across her face. For herself. For me. I couldn't tell which weighed more. "And?" "I told him I was cleanin'," I said. "Told him you were checkin' feed." She exhaled shakily, one hand going to her side again. "He doesn't believe me," she whispered. "Not fully. He's watching. He's always watching." The bruise on her cheek seemed darker now. Something in me shifted, like a plank coming loose in a floor I'd always trusted to hold my weight. "We can't keep meetin' in the barn, ma'am," I said. "Not now. Not with him sniffing around like this." Her eyes glistened in the low light. "I know," she said. "I know." For a moment, we stood in silence, separated by 10 feet of space and a whole world of rules. My body on one side, hers on the other, and a line between us that neither of us was supposed to cross. Then she spoke again, her voice tighter now, threaded with something like desperation. "But we can't stop either." The wind lifted, cool and thin, carrying the smell of damp earth and wood smoke. "Why not?" I asked, though the answer was already forming in the back of my mind. "Because stopping won't make him any less cruel," she said. "Stopping won't make you any less in danger. Stopping will only take from you the one thing he hasn't stolen yet." She looked at me with a fierce kind of sorrow. "Your mind." Lightning flickered far away on the horizon. Thunder rumbled, soft but growing. Silas Beaumont had noticed the shift in the wind. Now he was hunting the storm. And standing there in the half-dark yard, looking at the bruise on Clara's face and feeling the echo of his fingers on my jaw, I understood something. Our secret wasn't a small thing anymore. It wasn't just reading lessons in the barn. It was a fuse, lit now, burning quietly towards something we couldn't yet see. After that night in the stable, nothing on Cypress Bend looked the same, even though everything was the same. The fields still stretched wide and white, the rows neat as stitches in a wound that never healed. The quarters still smoked in the evenings, thin gray threads rising from crooked chimneys while women stirred pots and men dragged their bodies to rest. The big house still sat on its hill like a smug, white-faced judge, staring down at all of us with those tall columns and dark windows. But underneath all that sameness, something had shifted. Like the ground had cracked a little and only a few of us could feel our footing slide. Master Silas watched more. That was the first change. He still shouted, still cursed, still drank, still quoted scripture with whiskey on his breath. But now his eyes seemed to land on things they'd passed over before. On me, in particular. On Clara. On the spaces between us. If I crossed the yard, I could feel his gaze crawl across my back, even when I couldn't see him. If Clara left the house alone, someone always happened to be at a window. The overseer's whip lay nearer to his hand. The stable doors creaked open at odd times. The plantation had become a stage, and the master was a man who no longer trusted the actors. Our secret meetings didn't stop. They changed. The barn, once our quiet chapel of stolen words, became too dangerous. It sat too open, too visible from the main yard. The missing time was too easy to notice. The doors creaked too loud in the wrong ear. One afternoon, as I hauled buckets from the well, Thomas passed by with a basket of linens. His pace was slow, steady, his expression blank. But as he neared, his fingers brushed my arm, and under his breath, he muttered, "Garden shed. Sundown." Then he walked on like we'd never met. The garden shed sat near the back of Clara's prized rose beds, a small, weathered building where tools were kept, spades, rakes, pots for spring planting. In summer, folks came and went often enough. In the colder months, it slept. That evening, the sky turned the color of bruised fruit, purple and gray clouds swelling over the treetops. A storm threatened again, but hadn't committed yet. I slipped away from the quarters as the others settled in to eat, walking like a man sent on some errand, not like one moving toward the edge of his own life. The shed door creaked less than the barns. Just a small complaint as I slipped inside and closed it behind me. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust. The shed smelled of soil and old wood, Faint rose and rain-damp earth. A narrow beam of fading light came through a crack in the wall, cutting a line across the floor. She was already there. Clara sat on an overturned crate, hands folded tight in her lap, shoulders drawn in as if she were trying to take up less space in the world. Her cloak was pulled around her, the hood down, hair pinned up. She looked smaller in that little shed than she ever did on the veranda. More human, more breakable. "Ma'am," I said softly. She looked up, and I saw the bruise at her cheekbone had deepened, a sickly yellow pooling around the edges of purple. Another mark peeked at the edge of her collar, finger-shaped shadows on pale skin. Something hot and ugly rose in my chest at the sight. I pushed it down. Rage doesn't help a man who can't afford to show it. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. "I wasn't sure you would." "I said I would," I answered. "And I ain't much good at breaking my word." Her lips twitched like she wanted to smile, but the muscles of her face had forgotten how. "We can't meet in the barn anymore," she said. "He suspects something. He may not know what yet, but he smells it." She shivered as she spoke. "Every time he looks at me, I feel like a door is about to slam." "Then why keep meeting at all?" I asked, not accusing, just tired. "Words are fine, ma'am, but they don't change the lash. They don't stop the sales." Her gaze flicked to mine, sharp. "Words change people," she said, "and people change things. Not fast, not easily, not safely, but they can." I looked at my hands scarred, rough, stained with earth, and thought about all the changes my people had seen in their lives. New masters, new fields, new pain, not much else. "What you want from me, truly," I whispered. "It ain't just reading, is it?" "One?" She hesitated. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant murmur of the quarters and the soft rattle of branches against the shed. Then she reached into her cloak and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. She held it like one might hold a child carefully, with both hands. "I want you to live long enough to use that mind God gave you somewhere that doesn't kill men for having one," she said. "And I don't believe that place is Cypress Bend." The earth seemed to tilt. "What's that?" I asked, nodding at the bundle. She exhaled shakily, then set it on the crate between us and unwrapped it. Inside lay folded sheets of paper, edges worn, ink lines faint but distinct. On top of the stack, a small leather pouch slumped half open, and the faint clink of coins reached my ears. Maps. Money. I stared, uncomprehending at first. The lines on the paper weren't letters, but they meant something. Squiggles for creeks, curves for roads, dots where towns might be. "I copied them from my father's old survey charts," she said, words tumbling now, like she'd held them in too long. "He kept maps of the county, of the river, of routes north toward Tennessee. I remembered where he stored them. I redrew what I could. It's not perfect, but it's something." My mouth was dry. "You did this for me?" "For you," she said, "and for anyone else you might trust. For anyone who can run when the time comes." Run. The word hit me like a plank to the chest. "Ma'am," I whispered, heart pounding. "You're talking about escape." The word felt too big to breathe. She swallowed. "Yes." I shook my head hard. "You know what they do to slaves who try to run. You know what they do to the ones who help. You, of all people." "I know." Her voice fractured, then steadied. "I also know I cannot live the rest of my life watching him break you piece by piece. Watching him break all of you, knowing I did nothing when I could have done something." She touched the maps with trembling fingers. "I have so little power, Elijah," she said. "I can't change the law. I can't make Silas sell or free you. But I can do this. I can give you knowledge, direction, a chance." The shed suddenly felt too small for the size of what she was offering. "You think I ain't thought about running before?" I murmured. "Every man out there's thought about it. But thinking and doing, that's a wide river to cross. There's dogs, there's riders, there's posters with faces on 'em, punishments written beneath. They tear men apart to make examples. I know, she whispered again. Then why do this? I asked. Why risk his anger? He could kill you for less than this. Something flared in her eyes, anger, grief, defiance, all braided together. He already is, she said. We went quiet. The truth of it hung between us. He was killing her slow, with control, with isolation, with hands that left bruises and words that cut deeper than belts, with a house that kept her dressed and fed but starved her soul. And he was killing me quick, in small pieces back. Hands, hope, mind. Maybe our prisons weren't the same, but they were built by the same man. What you expect me to do? I asked finally, voice rough. Just leave everyone? My people, my little brother, the old ones who can't walk far. I run. They the ones get whipped, or sold, or worse. I don't know, she said, and the honesty in that answer hit me harder than any false promise would have. I don't know how to save everyone. I barely know how to save myself. But I know this. If no one ever runs, if no one ever tries, this place will swallow you whole and call it God's will. Her hand drifted toward the coins. There's a woman who keeps a boarding house near Natchez, she said, her voice low and quick now, as if afraid the walls themselves might be listening. I think hope she's part of a network. People who help the enslaved move north, or at least farther away from men like Silas. I'd heard whispers of such people. Ghost stories told in the quarters. Men in plain clothes who hid people in wagons. Quakers who opened their doors. Secret paths marked in code. Most of us thought it was just that stories. Hope clinging to a shape. You think? I repeated. She met my eyes. Yes, I can't be certain, but my cousin hinted at it once, before I married. He used to speak of friends along the river who did the Lord's work quietly. Her fingers shook around the pouch. I can't contact them directly without drawing suspicion. But if you got that far, if you carried the right name, maybe they would help. The right name? She took a breath. Tell them you come with Clara Beaumont's blessing, that my father was Charles Whitlow of Savannah, that I risked my life for you. Perhaps that will mean something. Silence pressed into my ears. Breathing felt like dragging air through mud. Why are you talking to me like this now? I whispered. Why not months ago? Years? Because 2 months ago, he wasn't watching you the way he is now, she said. 2 months ago, there was still a chance he'd never notice your mind. Now he's sniffing around, asking questions, counting your steps. I've seen this pattern before, Elijah. I've watched him choose his next victims. She looked away. I won't let it be you, not if I can help it. Her words were a weight and a gift at once. What if I say no? I asked after a long pause. What if I say I ain't leaving my people, ain't leaving my brother? Then you say no, she answered softly. And we burn these maps and forget we ever had this conversation. And I keep teaching you anyway, because if you're going to die here or live here, I at least want your mind to have traveled farther than your body ever can. The wind outside picked up, making the shed walls creak. In the distance, someone laughed abruptly, the sound carrying sharp and lonely across the yard. A dog barked. A door slammed. Inside, the world shrank to the crate between us, to the maps and coins, to the woman who had everything and nothing, and the boy who had nothing and everything left to lose. Slowly, I reached out and touched the edge of one map. My finger traced the ink snake of a river line. North. Unknown. Possible. I can't promise I'll go, I said. Not yet. Not till I see a way that don't leave my people to bleed alone. Her shoulders sagged in a way that looked almost like relief. That's more than I had yesterday, she whispered. We rewrapped the maps in the pouch in oilcloth. She slid the bundle toward me, and my hand hovered just above it. If I take this, I said, I cross something I can't uncross. That line was crossed in the barn, she said quietly. This is just us admitting it. My hand closed over the bundle. It felt heavier than the book, heavier than chains. Outside, thunder finally cracked. Close this time. Rain began to drum on the shed roof, steady and insistent. We waited for it to ease. It didn't. "I should go," I said at last. "Yes," she agreed. "Go out first. I'll follow later, from the other side of the garden." I stood, tucking the bundle beneath my shirt, feeling its hard edges against my ribs, right over my heart. For a moment, I hesitated at the door and looked back at her. She sat there alone in the dim light, hands folded, cloak gathered around her like armor that didn't quite fit. "We both fools," I murmured. "Perhaps," she said, "but I'd rather be a fool who tried than a coward who watched." Rain lashed the yard when I stepped out, cool against my face, washing the dust from my skin. I moved quick but not too quick, head down, the maps warm against my chest. By the time I reached the quarters, I knew one thing for certain. Clara Beaumont hadn't just given me paper and coins. She'd given me something far more dangerous. A choice. And choices, on a plantation like Cypress Bend, had consequences that could burn the whole place down. The night everything snapped didn't come with warning drums or fire in the sky. It came with mud. Rain had been falling steady for 2 days, turning the yard into a mess of slick brown ruts and puddles that reflected the gray, unsettled sky. The fields were too wet for picking, so we'd been kept close to the quarters and the outbuildings, set to mending, patching, hauling, anything that could be done under cover. Cypress Bend felt smaller when we weren't in the fields. Like all of us, whites and blacks alike were pressed in closer than we should have been, rubbing raw against each other. Silas didn't like bad weather. It trapped him, made his temper coil tighter. He stalked the house and yard, boots splashing through puddles, barking orders just to hear his own voice. More than once I saw him at a window, staring out with a look I'd learned to fear, the look of a man searching for a target. The barn roof had started leaking under all that rain. Water dripped from one of the crossbeams in a steady plink-plink into a growing puddle below. The overseer found it, cursed about ruined feed and lazy hands, and called for someone to climb up and patch it. He called for me. "Boy," he'd yelled, jabbing a dirty finger toward me where I was stacking kindling. "You're nimble. Get up there and fix that roof before the master's best hay rots." Fixing things wasn't unusual work for me. I had quick hands and a careful eye, but the barn, after everything, made my stomach twist. Still, refusing wasn't an option. So I grabbed a hammer, nails, and a patch of tarred canvas and headed that way, shoulders hunched against the rain that came in sideways on the wind. The barn was darker than usual when I stepped inside. Clouds smothered most of the daylight, leaving only a pale smear filtering through the gaps in the boards. The familiar smell of damp hay and horses wrapped around me. Water dripped from the ceiling into a shallow wooden trough someone had dragged beneath the leak. I set my tools down, wiped my palms on my trousers, and climbed the ladder up into the loft. Up there, the air felt closer, filled with dust and the soft rustle of mice moving through hay. I crawled along the beam toward the leak, the wood slick beneath my hands. Above my head, the storm drummed on the roof like fingers tapping out a warning. I was halfway through nailing the patch when I heard the barn door creak again. I froze. Boots scuffed the dirt below. Not many, just one set. Not heavy like the overseer's. Not light like a child's. I held my breath, listening. "Elijah?" Her voice. "Mrs. Beaumont." I nearly dropped my hammer. "Up here, ma'am," I called softly, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "Overseer sent me to patch the roof." I heard her move further in, skirts whispering across the dirt. The door thudded shut behind her, leaving us in a dim, gray half-light. "Of course he did," she murmured, almost to herself. "Of all days." "What you doing out here, ma'am?" I asked, still on my hands and knees. "Ground's bad. You'll slip." She didn't answer at first. The silence stretched long enough that I risked a glance down through the gaps in the boards. She stood near the center of the barn, cloak damp at the hem, hair pinned but looser than usual, a few strands clinging to her temples. Her face looked drawn, eyes shadowed, as if she hadn't slept in some time. one hand pressed against her ribs the way I'd seen before. "We don't have much time," she said at last, voice low but urgent. "He's worse." "The storm," she swallowed. "Storms unsettle him." I eased back from the patched spot and climbed partway down the ladder until I was level with the loft edge, looking down at her through the gloom. "Why'd you come here then?" I asked. "You should be in the house, ma'am, where he expects you to be." She gave a brittle, humorless laugh. "He expects me everywhere and nowhere," she said. "In his line of sight when he wishes, invisible when he doesn't. Today he's shut up in his study with the bottle. I had a sliver of space. I took it." She reached into her cloak and pulled out a folded scrap of newspaper, edges damp. "There's news," she said, lifting it. "Rumors of new patrols along the river. Men looking for runaways, hauling folks back in chains for reward money. If you plan to go, it has to be soon, or not at all." My heart clenched. I touched my chest instinctively, feeling the faint, comforting presence of the oilcloth bundle beneath my shirt, the maps and coins that had become a second heartbeat. "I ain't decided yet," I said. "Ain't the sort of thing a man rushes." She closed her eyes briefly, like my answer hurt in a way she couldn't show. "I know," she whispered, "but the world may not wait for your decision much longer." She stepped closer to the ladder, lifting the paper like she meant to hand it up to me. That was when the barn door slammed open. Not a creak this time. A crash. Wind howled through the opening, bringing a spray of cold rain. The lantern near the far stall shivered on its hook. My hand jerked, fingers tightening reflexively around the ladder rung. Silas Beaumont filled the doorway. He stood there a moment, framed by the gray light and falling rain, coat dark and damp at the shoulders, hat brim dripping. His face was flushed, not from exertion, but from drink. I could see it even from up in the loft. His eyes gleamed with that particular brightness I'd come to fear, mean, sharp, hungry. He took in the scene in one long, sweeping glance. His wife. In the barn. Alone. Head tipped back toward the loft. Hand raised with a scrap of paper. Me. Up high. Looking down. Everything in me turned to stone. Clara. Her name came out flat and dangerous. She flinched. Just a little. The newspaper crumpling in her hand. "Silas," she said, and I was shocked at how steady her voice sounded. "The roof is leaking. I came to." "To what?" He cut in, stepping fully inside. The door swung closed behind him with a heavy thud, shutting out the sound of the rain, leaving only the pounding of my heart and the echo of his boots on the dirt. "Supervise repairs? That why you're skulking out here, instead of where you belong?" I was simply... His gaze snapped upward, to me. And there it was, that moment when a predator spots the movement in the grass. "Boy," he said. The word cracked like the snap of a whip. "Get down from there." My fingers tightened on the ladder rung. For half a heartbeat, some wild part of me considered staying put, clinging to the loft like it was a safe branch. But there were no safe branches on Cypress Bend. Only different heights to fall from. "Yes, sir," I managed. I climbed down slowly, every step feeling like it carried a piece of my life with it. When my feet hit the packed dirt, I kept my eyes low, shoulders rounded, hands empty. The hammer and nails lay forgotten above. Silas's attention swung between us, back and forth, like a man weighing two objects in his hands and deciding which one to break first. "What's this?" he asked, pointing at the paper clenched in Clara's fist. "A report from town," she said quickly. "I received it this morning." And you thought the proper place to read it," he interrupted, "was out here, alone, with one of the field hands." His voice dragged along the words like he was tasting each one for bitterness. "He was already here," she said, "working. Shut your mouth," he snapped. The force of it made her close her lips like they'd been slapped. He turned to me. "You two looked awful cozy when I walked in," he said. "My wife, standing under my barn roof, handing something up to you like a present." He stepped closer, the riding crop already in his hand, though I hadn't seen him draw it. "What were you two doing?" Fixing the leak, sir, I said, forcing the words out evenly. Ma'am was just... Did I ask you to speak for her? He snarled. No, sir. His eyes narrowed. Seems to me you've forgotten your place, he said, climbing above my head, sharing secrets with my wife, taking liberties. The way he said that last word twisted my stomach. No, sir, I said quickly. Ain't no liberties taken. I was up there patching the blow came fast. The crop snapped across my cheek, white hot. A crack of pain so sharp it stole my breath. I stumbled sideways, tasting blood flood my mouth. The world flashed bright, then snapped back into dim focus. Silas, Clara cried, stepping forward. Stop it. He didn't. Be silent, he roared. She stopped mid-step, as if yanked by an invisible chain. He stalked closer to me, crop tapping against his thigh. I know the look of a man with secrets, he said, voice low and deadly. I've seen it on slaves who tried to run, on men who gambled with loaded dice, on women who... His gaze flicked back to Clara, then returned to me with renewed fury. You got that look, boy. My legs trembled, but I forced myself to stand upright. Not proud, just steady. The way you brace for a blow you can't dodge. He reached out and grabbed the front of my shirt, yanking me closer, close enough that I could see the red veins in his eyes, smell the sour mix of whiskey and power on his breath. What's between you and my wife? He hissed. Nothing, sir, I croaked. He shook me once, hard. My teeth clacked. Pain flared along my jaw where he'd struck. Don't lie to me, he breathed. I will skin the truth out of you if I have to. Silas! Her voice cut through the barn like a bell. He didn't turn at first. His grip on my shirt stayed iron tight. But something in her tone, something not pleading, not meek, but sharp, made his head jerk in her direction. She stood with her shoulders squared, chin lifted. Her breath came quick, but her eyes were clear. The crumpled newspaper shook slightly in her hand. It's my fault, she said. The words startled both of us. Silas narrowed his eyes. Explain. She drew herself up, every inch the plantation mistress now, not the frightened woman I'd seen in the shed, but someone harder, forged by fear and fury. I summoned him, she said. I ordered him to meet me here. Why? His voice was ice. To test him, she answered, too quickly for it to be entirely made up. The other ladies talk about slaves, getting ideas about reading, about running. You've spoken of it yourself. I wanted to see if he'd take the bait if I offered something forbidden. I wanted to know where his loyalties lay before rumors started. I thought, she inhaled sharply. I thought I could handle it. His gaze flicked between us, suspicion and a cruel kind of amusement warring in his expression. You expect me to believe you were playing some sort of game? He sneered. Not a game, she said quietly. A test. One that went too far. The meaning under those words hung heavy in the air. Her eyes met mine for a split second. In them, I read what she couldn't say aloud. Tell him nothing. Let him believe what keeps you alive. Silas turned back to me, still holding my shirt. You touch her? He asked softly. No, sir, I rasped. You think of touching her? No, sir. He searched my face again, looking for cracks. Finally, he shoved me backward. I stumbled, nearly falling, but caught myself against a post. You wanted to test him, he said to Clara. Fine. The test continues. He pointed the crop at me. Strip to the waist, he ordered. My stomach turned to ice. Silas. No, Clara said sharply. That's not necessary. He rounded on her. You start a test, and I'll finish it, he spat. You wanted to know if he had ideas above his station? We'll beat the ideas out and see what's left. I could feel myself floating outside my own body as my fingers moved to my shirt. The fabric clung to my skin with sweat and damp. I pulled it over my head and dropped it to the dirt, the air cold on my back. I'd been whipped before. Every man here had. You learned to measure pain like whether it came. It passed. It left marks. But this felt different. This felt like a line being drawn in blood. "Turn around," he said. I obeyed. The first lash caught me high across the shoulders, a searing band of fire that stole my breath. The second landed lower, crossing the first. I bit down hard, jaw clenched, refusing to make a sound. By the third, the world had narrowed to the circle of light on the barn floor and the sound of the crop hissing through the air. Somewhere, just beyond that circle, I knew Clara stood, watching. "Who owns you?" Silas snarled between strikes. "You do, sir," I gasped. "Who owns your back?" "You do, sir." "Who owns your mind?" For the briefest moment, my answer lodged in my throat. Another lash cut down, sharper than the rest. "You do, sir," I forced out, tasting metal and shame. He hit me again anyway. At some point, the blows stopped being separate. They blurred into one long, burning line of pain that wrapped around my ribs, shoulders, spine. My legs trembled. My hands clawed at the air. "Silas, please," Clara said hoarsely. "You've made your point." He paused, breathing hard, sweat shining on his forehead. The crop sagged in his grip. "You think I'm doing this for fun?" he demanded, though any fool could see he was. "I'm protecting what's mine. This place. This family. You. From them. From them. From me." He stepped back, threw the crop to the ground. "If I hear even a whisper of you near my wife again," he panted, "I'll have you hung from that beam." I stared at the dirt, chest heaving, back blazing, vision swimming. "Yes, sir," I wheezed. "Get out of my sight," he snapped. I bent, grabbed my shirt with shaking hands, and stumbled toward the door. Each step sent fresh jolts of pain down my spine. When I reached the threshold, I risked one glance back. Clara stood, rooted where she'd been, face pale, eyes wide and wet. Her hands were clenched so tight around the newspaper that her knuckles showed through the skin. Our eyes met for a heartbeat. There was guilt there, and horror, and something else. A promise. Then I stepped into the rain, and the barn door closed behind me with a final, heavy thud. He hadn't killed me. He hadn't sold me. He had branded me, not with iron, with fear. And in doing so, he'd forced something else into sharp, painful focus. Staying on Cypress Bend would kill me slow. Leaving might kill me fast. But after that night in the barn, I knew with a terrible, aching certainty, there would come a day when the choice wouldn't be a thought anymore. It would be a door, and I would have to walk through it or die on the wrong side. I don't remember falling. One moment, the barn was full of the sound of the crop cutting the air, of my heart roaring in my ears, of Silas's voice drilling questions into my skull. The next, everything narrowed to a tunnel of gray light and pain. The floor rushed up. My knees hit first, then my hands, then nothing. I must have blacked out, though not for long. On a plantation, even unconsciousness doesn't last. You don't get to stay gone when there's work to be done. When I came back to myself, I was lying face down in the muddy yard just beyond the barn, rain spitting on my bare back, seeping into the open lines the whip had carved there. My shirt was shoved under my chest, half in the mud, half tangled in my fingers. Voices drifted nearby, muffled like they were coming from underwater. "Leave him," someone said. "Master said he's had enough." "Enough," another voice answered bitterly. "Lord help us if that's what enough looks like." Hands rolled me gently onto my side. Pain flared sharp, then radiated out in hot waves. I bit back a groan and tasted blood again. Through the blur, I recognized Thomas leaning over me, his lined face tight with something like anger and worry mashed together. "Easy, boy," he muttered. "You still with us?" "Think so," I croaked. "Then you stronger than most," he said. "Come on now." It took both him and another man to lift me, one under each arm. My legs didn't feel like they belonged to me. They just dragged along, sending new spikes of pain through my back with every step. The rain had turned to drizzle, cold and fine, clinging to my skin like a second, thinner shirt. They didn't carry me to the quarters. Not right away. Instead, they detoured past the smokehouse to a narrow side door near the back of the big house, a door I'd never been through before. It opened into a small, dim room that smelled faintly of herbs and lye soap, with a narrow table and shelves lined with jars. The mistress's treatment room. "Put him there," a familiar voice said. I blinked hard. Clara stood by the table, sleeves rolled to the elbow, apron tied tight. Her hair was pinned up hastily, a few strands fallen loose around her face. She looked strange there, less like a mistress, more like a weary nurse in a battlefield hospital she never chose. "Ma'am," I rasped, trying to push away from the men carrying me. "You ain't." "Hush," she said, and there was nothing soft about it. "You'll make it worse." They laid me face down on the table. The wood was cool against my chest. A bowl of water sat nearby, along with strips of clean linen and a small jar of something thick and dark that smelled like pine and camphor. "Thomas," she said, voice low but steady, "stay at the door. If anyone comes, you cough twice." "Yes, ma'am," he replied, taking his post. She moved behind me, and I felt the air shift as she leaned close. The first touch of the wet cloth to my back made me hiss, every nerve screaming at once. "Sorry," she whispered. "I have to clean it, or it'll fester." I gripped the edge of the table, fingers digging into the wood, and forced myself not to move. Each stroke of the cloth dragged through the torn skin, sending fire racing along the lash lines. I focused on the shelf in front of me, on a crooked glass jar with a cracked label, on the way the candle flame flickered in a draft. "You shouldn't be here," I muttered. "If he finds you—" "He won't," she said. "He's drunk himself senseless. He thinks he's solved the problem." Her breath hitched. Men like him always think pain is the answer. The cloth paused. Her fingers trembled just slightly against my skin. "He could have killed you," she said quietly. "He didn't," I replied. "I'm not sure that makes him merciful," she said. "It just means he wants you alive enough to keep breaking." The ointment came next, cool, then burning, then a spreading heat that settled into a dull throb. I clenched my teeth as she worked, her touch as gentle as the injuries would allow. "Why you doing this?" I asked, through gritted teeth. "You already took the blame in the barn. He's likely to punish you too." "Already has," she said simply, like she'd mentioned the weather. I wanted to ask how, where, what he'd done, but the question felt like reaching into a wound I had no right to touch. "You shouldn't have said it was your fault," I whispered. "Now he thinks you was—" "I know what he thinks," she cut in sharply. Then, softer, "I also know what he would have done if he'd believed you had secrets with me that didn't serve him." Something cold twisted in my gut. "So you lied to save my life," I said. She dabbed at a fresh line of blood, voice tight. "I lied to limit the damage. And it didn't limit much, did it?" Silence settled over us, heavy and full of all the things neither of us could change. "You don't owe me nothing," I said finally. "You should stop this now. The lessons, the maps, all of it. It's too costly." Her hand stilled. "Costly to who?" she asked. "To you. To me. To everyone around us." She let out a slow, shaky breath. "Do you think stopping will make him kinder?" she asked. "Do you think if we go back to pretending there's nothing more in you than what he sees, it'll spare you?" I didn't answer, because we both knew the truth. "The difference now," she continued, resuming her work, "is that you've seen what he'll do to keep you small, and I've seen what he'll do when he thinks I've stepped out of line. Nothing about his nature has changed. Only our illusions have." The cloth moved in slow, careful strokes. I focused on breathing. Inhale, exhale, count to 3 between each, while her words sank deeper than the salve. "What's done is done," she said. "We can't go back. The only question left is what we do with what we know." "And what is it we know, ma'am?" I asked. "You're not safe here," she said. "Not truly. Not anymore. Maybe not ever again." The truth of it lay bare, like my back beneath her hands. "You think I didn't know that before?" I murmured. "You knew it in pieces," she replied. In beatings, in stolen moments, in whispers. She dabbed at another cut. Now you've seen the full shape of it. Sometimes a thing has to break wide open before we can see it clearly. The room swam at the edges of my vision. Pain does that, pulls the world in tight around it, until everything else becomes background noise. Still, I heard the quiet scrape of her stool as she sat back, the clink of the ointment jar closing. It will scar, she said. Most things do, I answered. She moved into my peripheral vision then, standing near my head. Her face looked older than it had months before, not in years, but in weight. The bruise on her cheek had faded a little, but new shadows had formed under her eyes. I have to ask you something, she said. Seems like we passed askin' and into doin' these days, I muttered, managing the ghost of a smile. Her mouth twitched, but didn't quite shape into one. If you stay, she asked quietly, what do you think happens to you? I didn't answer at first. Didn't want to give shape to things I'd kept locked away in the dark corners of my mind. You seen what happens, I said finally. More of what he did today. Maybe worse. Maybe he sells me when he gets bored of hurting me himself. Maybe he puts me on a chain gang, works me, till I drop. And if you leave, she pressed, if you use the maps, the money, might die on the road, I said. Dogs could catch me. Patrols could shoot me. Somebody could drag me back, and he'd make sure it's the last time. So either way, she said, voice barely above a whisper, your life sits in another man's hands. Seems that way. She leaned in slightly. What if, she said, just once, you chose whose hands? The question hung between us like smoke. Freedom isn't safe, Elijah, she continued. But slavery isn't safe either. The difference is who you answer to when you wake up each morning, another man, or the voice that lives inside your own head. My throat tightened. It ain't just my life, I said. I leave. There's a hole where I used to stand. My brother, the others. I know, she said, and it's a cruelty I can't justify or erase. But I also know this. You staying to protect them doesn't stop their suffering. It just adds yours to the pile. You leaving doesn't abandon them, it plants you somewhere you might one day help them from. I thought of the maps pressed against my ribs at night, of rivers and roads I'd never seen, of towns where no one knew my name or my chains. I thought of my little brother, James, his hands already calloused at 12, his eyes too old. How I'm supposed to live with myself, I asked, if I go and they pay for it. How are you supposed to live with yourself if you die here having never tried? She countered softly. We fell quiet again. After a while, Thomas coughed twice at the door, his warning signal. Clara straightened quickly, wiping her hands on a cloth. Can you stand? She whispered. I stood here, I said through gritted teeth. I can do it again. It took effort, but I pushed myself upright. The room spun for a moment, then steadied. Clara moved as if to help, then stopped, catching herself before she crossed another visible line. The rules were thicker in this room. Walls had ears here. There's a church wagon leaving for Natchez in 5 days, she said quietly, while she tied the fresh bandage at my waist. Taking supplies. The driver drinks. A lot. By the time he reaches the second crossroads past the river, he'll be half asleep in his seat. If a man were hidden under the tarp before it left, and slipped out when the wagon slowed on the hill. She didn't finish. She didn't need to. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. You sure it's safe to speak this plain? I asked. No, she said. Nothing about this is safe. But we're past half words. Her fingers brushed mine just once as she handed me my folded shirt. A spark ran up my arm, not of romance, not of anything like what stories might someday tell, but of shared danger, shared choice. You'll have 3 nights to decide, she said. If you mean to go, you must be in the far stable at dawn on the 5th day. Thomas will help. If you're not there, her voice quivered but held. Then we burn the maps, and we spend whatever days God gives us pretending none of this ever happened. I pulled my shirt on slowly, grimacing as the fabric dragged across my back. You could tell him, I said quietly. Tell him I forced you. That I tricked you. That this was all my doing. You could wash your hands of it. Her eyes flashed, sudden and sharp. He's taken enough from me, she said. He doesn't get to take my choices too. She hesitated, then added, even softer. You don't either. We looked at each other a long moment. Two people tied to the same stake, ropes wound different ways. 3 nights, I repeated. 3 nights, she confirmed. Thomas coughed, again urgent this time. Clara stepped back, mask sliding over her face like a veil. By the time she opened the door, her posture had shifted, shoulders softer, gaze lowered. The gentle, fragile mistress had returned. I stepped out past her, head bowed, the way they expected. To anyone watching, it was just another slave, patched up after punishment by a mistress who liked to play at mercy. But inside, everything was different. Back in the quarters, the men glanced at my stiff movements, at the lines of fresh bandage visible near my collar. They didn't ask. Not yet. Night would bring questions, quiet and close. I lay on my stomach that evening, cheek pressed to the rough pallet, listening to the rain ease and the murmur of voices around me. James curled nearby, pretending to sleep but not fooling me. The maps burned hot against my skin, a second set of wounds. 3 nights. I counted the breaths between each creak of the roof, each cough, each snore. Counted them the way I'd counted lashes. But this time, I wasn't measuring pain. I was measuring the distance between the life I had and the one I might reach for. By the time the first night surrendered to dawn, one truth had settled deep into me, heavy as stone. Staying would be easier. Leaving would be right. And somewhere between easy and right, a boy called Elijah would have to decide what kind of man he meant to become. The 3 nights Clara gave me were the longest of my life. Not because time moved, slow plantation nights always do that, but because I wasn't sure which life I'd wake up inside when the sun rose each morning. Every hour asked a new question. Every breath felt like standing on a ridge, with wind pushing both ways. On the first night, the pain in my back kept me half awake, half dreaming. Each throb reminded me of the barn, of Silas's voice, of the crop carving its heat into me. I lay still on my stomach, listening to the quarters breathe around me, soft snores, quiet murmurs, a baby crying somewhere down the row, life happening the only way it could under weight. James slept close by. He'd rolled over during the night, his hand drifting onto my arm the way he used to when we were smaller, before the plantation scared softness out of him. In the dim light, I studied his face, young still, but changing, a jawline forming, sleeves all too short for arms growing fast. "What you starin' at?" he rasped, without opening his eyes. "Just making sure you breathing," I whispered back. He hummed low, more a vibration than sound. "Still here," he mumbled. "Ain't planning on going nowhere." The words slid into my ribs like a blade. Because I was planning. The maps dug warm against my skin. His hand stayed on my arm. I didn't sleep again. The second night. Word travels quiet in slave quarters, the way wind sneaks under doors. By the next evening, most everyone knew I'd taken a beating. Not the details, just the silhouette of it. A whipping that lasted too long. A master in a storm mood. A boy who'd done something. Nobody asked me the story. That's a rule among us. You don't pick at another man's wounds. But they watched me with a different kind of silence. The silence of people who see a brother walking a line that could tilt either way. Old Jacob, who slept in the corner, caught my eye when I stepped out into the cold for air. His back was bent, his left leg stiff from an old injury that never healed right. He'd been born into bondage long before I drew my first breath. "You limpin' around like that," he said quietly, "means you done seen something that changed you." "I ain't changed," I muttered, but the lie tasted bitter. Jacob lifted one of his twisted hands. "Son, pain changes everyone. That's its only job." I didn't answer him. Didn't have to. He already knew. When I went back inside, I found James sitting cross-legged on our pallet. "You goin' somewhere?" he said. Not as a question, but like he'd already lived the answer. My breath caught. What makes you say that? He shrugged, eyes fixed on the floor. You look like your feet already on the road. A long silence sat between us. You know what happens if I stay, I finally said. And you know what happens if you go, he countered. I closed my eyes. He wasn't wrong. If I stayed, Silas would finish what he started. If I left, James might bear the punishment. Maybe you go so I don't have to, he whispered. My eyes snapped open. He didn't look at me, but the truth of him sat heavy and sharp in his small shoulders. You think I want that? I asked. You think I want you dying in that barn? He shot back, voice cracking. Or sold, or beat down to where you don't know your own name. You go, maybe that means one of us gets free. One's more than none. My throat tightened so hard I couldn't swallow. That night, he slept with his back pressed to mine, careful of the wounds, but close enough that I could feel the shape of him warm, breathing, alive. When dawn broke, I still hadn't chosen. The third night. On the third evening, the quarters were tense in a way you could taste. Silas had spent the day riding the yard like a man hunting shadows. The dogs paced more. The overseer yelled more. Even the horses in the barn seemed spooked. Something was coming. Everyone felt it. I went to the edge of the field when the sky turned indigo, needing space to think. The stars were just starting to prick through the clouds, cold, distant sparks that didn't care who lived or died down below. I whispered to them. Not a prayer. Just truth. I'm scared, I said into the wind. More scared than I've been since I was little. A voice answered behind me. You got reason to be. I turned slow. Thomas stood there, shoulders hunched against the cold, hands deep in his pockets. His expression was unreadable, the way it always was when he walked the line between helping and surviving. He stepped beside me and looked out across the dark stretch of fields. Mrs. done all she can, he murmured. That wagon leaves at dawn tomorrow. I know. Men like the master, he said, shaking his head. When they sense something slippin' from their grip, they don't loosen, they squeeze. I know. Thomas hesitated. You think she's safe if you leave? He asked quietly. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. I don't know. I breathed. I don't know nothing anymore. He nodded, slow and sad. That's the curse of choices. But listen, boy. He turned his face toward me, eyes steady. Sometimes one man gettin' free shakes the world more than 100 stayin' chained. Sometimes one spark is enough. I stared at him. Why you helpin' me? I asked. His mouth twitched. 'Cause someone helped me once, he said. And I didn't run. Been regrettin' that for 30 years. He squeezed my shoulder, gentle but firm. Don't you live with that kind of regret. When he walked away, I knew. The decision wasn't coming. It had already come. I'd just been afraid to name it. The fifth day dawn. When the bell clanged in the pre-dawn dark, I rose before the others, silent as breath. My back screamed when I moved, but I swallowed the pain. James stirred, eyes opening just enough to see me. This it? He whispered. This it, I said. He sat up, jaw clenched. You want me to come? No, I said quickly. If you come, they'll kill us both. You stay, grow, learn, and when the time comes, you take your own road. He looked like he wanted to argue. Then his face crumpled in a way I'd never seen. You come back for me one day, he said fiercely, grabbing my hand. You promise. I promise, I said, though I knew the world didn't care about promises from boys in cabins. He pulled me into a tight, shaking hug, careful of my back, but clinging like a drowning soul. I held him until I couldn't anymore. When I stepped out into the cold, the sky was a deep blue bruised with purple. Frost clung to the grass. My breath fogged in front of me. The far stable stood at the edge of the yard, a dark silhouette against the paling sky. Every step toward it felt like walking toward two graves, one marked staying, one marked running. Only one of them had space dug for me. Thomas waited near the back entrance. Hood pulled low. You ready? He whispered. No, I said honestly. Good, he replied. Only fools ready, wise men scared. He lifted the tarp. Underneath lay sacks of cloth, crates of church supplies, a coil of rope, just enough room for a man to lie curled, hidden. He nodded at the space. Get in. I froze, not with cold, not with doubt, with the overwhelming weight of what crossing that threshold meant. If I climbed into that wagon, Elijah, slave boy of Cypress Bend, would die on that floor. Maybe I'd still die on the road. Maybe I'd make it north. Maybe I'd vanish into a world that didn't want me, but I wouldn't be his anymore. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the wagon. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Light ones, soft ones. I knew them before I turned. Clara. Her cloak wasn't fastened right. Her hair wasn't pinned. She'd run. Elijah, she breathed. Time froze. Thomas slid back into the shadows. She stepped close, eyes wide and shining in the half-light. Go, she whispered urgently. Go now, before he wakes. I stared at her. The woman who'd taught me words, maps, choices. The woman who'd taken a beating meant for me and given me a future I didn't dare imagine before her. If he finds out, I began. He will, she said. But I'd rather suffer for doing right than live easy doing nothing. Her voice shook, but her gaze did not. I didn't have words big enough for what she'd done. Thank you, I whispered. She reached out then, hesitated, then rested her hand briefly against my cheek, the one without a bruise. The touch was light, human, a kind of farewell the world had no place for. Live, she whispered. Just live. That's all I ask. A shout echoed faintly from the big house. Silas was up. Thomas hissed. Now! I climbed into the wagon. The tarp dropped. Darkness closed around me, thick and close. My heart pounded so loud I feared the horses would hear it. Outside, I heard Clara's voice. Calm, cold, controlled. Mr. Turner, she said to the wagon driver, your supplies are late. Go on. The wagon lurched forward. Mud churned under wheels. Voices faded behind us. The plantation shrank with every jostling turn. Under the tarp, in the dark, pressed between crates and breathless fear, I whispered to myself, just live. Reflection. Years later, freedom didn't come all at once. It came in pieces. In the nights I slept hungry but unowned. In the days I walked roads without asking permission. In the river crossings that nearly drowned me. In the hands of strangers who hid me in barns and cellars and attics. In the slow shedding of fear. In the first sunrise I ever saw with no overseer to measure it. Every mile away from Cypress Bend felt like a mile back toward myself. I didn't forget her. Clara Beaumont. Her face in that barn light. Her voice reading poems. Her trembling hands holding maps she wasn't supposed to know existed. Her choosing to act when the world demanded she stay silent. She stayed. I left. But the truth is, we rescued each other in different ways. Sometimes I wonder if she survived Silas. Sometimes I wonder if she stayed long enough to see freedom dawn across the South. Sometimes I imagine her standing on that veranda, watching soldiers ride in, head high for the first time in years. Maybe that's just wishful thinking, but hope is the only luxury I ever learned to afford. As for James, I kept my promise. The night after Union troops swept through Mississippi in '63, I crossed back under a different sky, wearing clothes I chose myself, carrying bread I bought with my own wages. I found him taller, thinner, alive, and when he saw me, he didn't cry, didn't shout, didn't fall apart. He just nodded once and said, "Took you long enough." I laughed. I hadn't laughed in years. Sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and my back aches from the weather, I trace the scars that cross my shoulders, raised like old roads, healed but never forgotten. Those scars don't define me. They remind me of the barn, the storm, the woman with the trembling hands, the boy I used to be, the man I forced myself to become. And every time I feel them under my fingers, I whisper the same words Clara breathed into my life at the edge of everything. Just live. And I did. And I do. And I will.